ERP selection is a real challenging discipline, and I would say 50% of a successful ERP implementation is proper ERP selection. It's much harder to implement the wrong system than it is to implement the right system. So if you can get on the right footing, that's great. Successful ERP selection is all based on business requirements, understanding what your business does, what it needs to do, and then mapping those things and doing that systematically.
Where do you see the ERP industry heading right now?
I'd say ERP is even more fundamental to a business. So I'd say an understanding of the difficulty of the road ahead. If you're running a race, you want to know ERP, you're running a marathon.
Tell us 3 hacks to do a successful ERP implementation.
Say one has to do with resource scheduling. The next tends to be interconnectedness, collaboration. 3 would be clear expectations and guidelines.
Why do you think ERP projects fail? 3 things to do to avoid failure.
So why do projects fail? 1, you pick the wrong methodology. That's 1. There's pick the right methodology. 2, pick the right system. Avoiding failure beyond those 2, I think really at that point, this sounds too wishy-washy. I like management commitment. Management has to be committed to getting this project finished. AI is becoming a huge talking point inside of the ERP community. I think AI has connected itself to a lot of existing talking points in terms of automation and integration most often. Because the idea of automation, can AI help take mundane tasks, automate them such that my end user is now focused on more value-added tasks, better customer communication because some of the underlying steps were completed by a bot or what have you. That is something that comes up very frequently.
Talking about the cloud strategy, where are you hosting it? There are big clouds in the market, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud. How do you decide, right?
Understanding the degree of access and control that you want is really important in terms of making the right decisions.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Driven by DCKAP podcast. I'm your host, Karthik Chidambaram, CEO of DCKAP. We make systems talk to each other for distributors. We are here in Nashville, Tennessee, and we have with us Brad Feakes, the president of EstesGroup. EstesGroup is an ERP implementation partner for Epicor. EstesGroup implements ERP solutions and they also host ERP solutions on the cloud. Brad, welcome to Driven by DCKAP.
Thank you for having me, Karthik. This has been great.
Thank you for joining us today, Brad. It's great to be chatting with you. And also I bumped into you yesterday, so it's always nice to see you in person. And I'm glad we are doing this in person in Nashville. So Brad, tell us about the EstesGroup business. What do you guys do and what do you specialize in?
Sure. So EstesGroup, we're celebrating our 20th anniversary in June. And historically, we've been focused primarily on ERP implementation and optimization and the consulting activities that come along with that. Over the years, we found ourselves kind of transforming slowly into kind of a combined ERP implementation provider, but also a bit of a managed IT services provider. We found our customers wanted from us a broader set of skill sets and capabilities, and these bled into IT management, cloud deployment. So we found ourselves moving into a lot of cloud deployments for our customers and helping support them in those areas. So it's been an interesting evolution over the course of my life here at Estes.
So you started with them in 2016 or 2015, around that time frame, and then you became the president of the company. Tell us about that journey, because whenever I talk to people, the theme of this podcast is driven, and I see that you are a very driven person. You work hard, you travel, and I really love hanging out with you. And tell us about your journey at Estes. What made you the president of the company, and tell us about that journey.
Luck and attrition. So I've been with Estes now for 10 years because I joined in 2014, and in March I celebrated my 10 year. And so I've started off as a business consultant, started off working kind of in the trenches, as it were. And over time, I found myself getting promoted and moved around and given additional responsibilities. And I found that, just by taking on more and being willing to try and parlay my previous experiences into use in the current world at Estes, I was able to take on more and find myself eventually in the spot I'm in now.
So what were the challenges with thrown out to you? You were up for it, and then that made your career go up?
Oh boy, the big challenges is always, you're always diving into a situation. You're diving into a swimming pool without great confirmation that you can swim, and having to throw yourself in the water anyways with the belief that, one, you have a lifeguard somewhere out there who can throw in a raft in the event that you start taking in water, and two, that you will pick it up and be able to keep your head above and eventually become proficient at those new disciplines as they approach.
DCKAP and EstesGroup have been partners for a while now, and we love partnering and working together. You do a really good job with respect to partnerships. You really build on it. Tell us about how you manage and build on partnerships.
Sure. So for partners, for us, has just been this really exciting ability to get into a group of people and really just kind of expand and open. For me, the partner community and distribution is incredibly collaborative. This is between just customers, distributors themselves, even, competitors. You find them collaborating because they can achieve more by working together, even if they're after the same market. And I think that spirit is of collaboration. It tells the rest of us how we should be behaving. And I find when you're working with other partners, you learn so much about the market and its intricacies. And you get all these different perspectives by working with different partners because they're all addressing this market and its needs differently. And when you take all those together, there's so much benefit in that collaboration that when you couple that with your own customer experience, you learn so much. So for us, it's just a great benefit for all to be celebrating, say, DCKAP's capabilities. It's not a zero-sum game. Because when we're celebrating what you guys can do and how you can help people, it helps us in intangible and intangible ways. So for me, it's that kind of activity just fosters a lot of fun for everyone involved. And if in my mind, the idea of, work hard, have fun, and get along with people. If you can do those three things, boy, you got a pretty good work life. And for us, that's kind of, I think, the pillars that underscore our partner work.
Yeah, 1+1 equal to 3. And it's also about, when it comes to partnerships, it's not about what you get, it's about what you give. And the more you give, the more you get.
Right. Yeah, that's implicit. That idea of that work that comes together when you're collaborating with another group, another person, the unexpected things that can come out of that. And if you just take that in good faith and not always worry about, well, what's in it for me, you can have so much more fun. And yeah, the ultimate outcomes are so much better.
We are in Nashville, Tennessee, a very nice resort at the Epicor Insights conference. And let's talk a little bit about ERP. When it comes to ERP, a lot of customers struggle with it, right? Especially with respect to implementations. But even before we get to implementations a little bit, how do customers choose an ERP vendor?
Oh boy. ERP selection is a real challenging discipline. And I would say 50% of a successful ERP implementation is proper ERP selection. It's much harder to implement the wrong system than it is to implement the right system. So if you can get on that on the right footing, that's great. I think successful ERP selection is all based on business requirements, understanding what your business does, what it needs to do, and then mapping those things and doing that systematically, right? Systematically going department by department, understanding what you do, what the needs are to support the business, and how that overlays to the capabilities of the systems in question. Quite often, having like a selection partner who can help kind of walk you through that. We have some friends in the market that are very good at that, at helping to walk you through that comparison process. And using that as understanding your business is kind of the first step, not only to selection, but to everything that follows.
So having a selection partner will help. But, again, it's a big decision, right? Because your entire company is going to run on the software you implement. But is there a way where you can test it, do some test projects or do some pilot runs? Have you seen customers do that or not really?
Really, the degree to which you can get under the hood is kind of specific to the vendor. Interestingly enough, I'm an Epicor consultant by trade because Epicor did the best job for my previous company at demonstrating Epicor's value compared to its competitors. Epicor was going up against some of your classic big ERP systems, and those big customers those big vendors were not really interested in closing that gap, bridging that gap for the company I worked for, and Epicor was much better at that. And it came through kind of systematic prototypes, presentations. It wasn't so much, the level of depth that you can normally get into is not what I think a lot of people would hope for. But Epicor definitely came to the table with much more of that. So I think the key is, taking business requirements, sample data, and trying to model that in the future state system to give people a first pass understanding of, hey, this is how your business might look like inside of our system. And if you're a solution provider, a vendor, and you can't demonstrate that, you're going to have a hard time convincing the customer that your system is the right system for them.
A lot of times, ERP implementations take a long time, right? So, it just takes forever to implement. And I've seen some customers spend a lot of money with some really expensive softwares out there. And then, just takes 15 months or it takes like 2 years to implement, and then there's also a cost to maintain it. Where do you see the ERP industry heading right now?
Oh boy. So I would say the first thing that I think is really important is an understanding of the difficulty of an ERP implementation. It's about the most difficult thing that a business goes through. I've been through lean implementations, Six Sigma implementations in prior lives, and those create challenges. I'd say ERP is even more fundamental to a business. So I'd say an understanding of the difficulty of the road ahead. If you were running a race and you want to know ERP, you're running a marathon. Right? What is an ERP implementation? You run all day and you throw up on the finish line. And that's the unfortunate reality of an ERP project. They're difficult. So the idea of making an ERP project successful is a challenge, but it needs to be level set with an understanding. I was talking with a customer just yesterday, and they were my golden child customer in terms of the best implementation I had been a part of. I was a project manager and an ops consultant on it, and they never thought of themselves as successful. And for me, it was just kind of pulling them back and saying, hey, you don't realize how much you did right. And some of that might be that the business did not acknowledge all the work they did. They only acknowledged the time, the cost, the difficulties, not realizing that the end product they ended up with in the successful implementation, good data, good business process, good system, maintainability, ROI, all those things were there. And I think that's it starts with that understanding of the difficulties, and then from there, where you can go to keep that business moving forward.
Yeah, I was chatting with Frank Heenan, Group Vice President at Epicor, and we were just talking about implementations as well. And one thing he said is, start with why. Hey, why are you really doing it? And what's the purpose? And just don't leave it to the IT folks. Just get the entire business involved, right? So it needs to be a part of the game plan. It needs to be a part of the strategy. And yeah, it is a very important part of the strategy. You think about it, right? Because great softwares can make actually a big difference to running a company.
It's interesting. Yes, I was thinking of, in prep for this session, some of the managerial lessons that you have. And one of them was exactly what Frank said, is when you disrespect someone, you only tell them the what. We need to do this. We need to implement ERP. If you give them the what and the why, you're showing respect and you're pulling them into that discussion in terms of that initiative, in terms of we need to implement ERP because our existing AS400 system is going to die soon. We need to implement ERP because we can't keep living on spreadsheets if we want to grow and be successful. That why is always there. Conveying that as part of the what can really help remind people of, the goal to be achieved and the value in doing so.
So tell us 3 hacks to do a successful ERP implementation.
Okay, so if I was going to look at 3, I would say 1 has to do with resource scheduling. Now, when we talk about project management, we're normally thinking of a Gantt chart and a project schedule. That's where people's brains go to. I would say the resource schedule is as important as the project schedule, and that is who from the team is going to be involved in an ERP implementation. Now, speaking quickly, there are 2 major ways you can implement a project. You can have a consultant-driven implementation or a customer-driven implementation. In the former, the consultants coming in are kind of a proxy for the organization, defining requirements, surfacing requirements, and configuring the system to handle them. Those are costly. Those are cumbersome. They don't have enough user involvement, company involvement, and the final solution quite often misses the mark. Now, what Epicor taught me, and what I like about Epicor is they have what is much more a customer-driven solution with a core team that is trained up and ramped up. The consultants are more in kind of the teach them to fish mode, where you're helping those customers learn how to use the system, make business decisions, understand their business requirements, combine them with the system, and then develop business processes. It's more of an oversight role, educational role, and slowly kind of ramping off the ownership of the application to that core team. In my mind, that is such a key piece to the resources. If you've got to have resources in that project that are working on that project. Now, customers that commit less to resources tend to suffer later. So that's really one is key is resource planning. The next tends to be, I would say, interconnectiveness, collaboration. ERP systems are integrated. The way you enter a sales order will have great impacts on the work orders or jobs downstream and how they will flow through. So delivery and sales are intrinsically linked in an ERP system. This is new for a lot of organizations that are implementing ERP for the first time. So the collaborative aspect of I might be entering a project as a purchasing agent. But if I know a little bit about order entry and a little bit about production management, I know so much more about how that integrates with my buying activities. I mean, I'm buying this product because this work order requires it, because this sales order has asked to have this product delivered. So you understand those interactions. You can troubleshoot, you can ask questions, you can define processes much, much more rapidly when everybody is in collaboration. So I'd say that's number two. The three would be clear expectations and guidelines. So this requires more project management oversight on the hand of the customer. Most often is, and the importance of an on-site project manager is really important, because they can help break down the work into detailed deliverables so that people from a week-to-week basis know what they have to work on and don't feel like they're just kind of toiling around, fiddling with the system and not exactly sure what to do. Is trying to define that work breakdown structure into detailed things of, we need to define these processes. Once those processes are defined, we need to define the data that needs to be happening. From there, we need to define the end user procedures and document the details. These are the things that you're responsible for. When you know what you're responsible for, now you can go and you can chase that. Now, kind of a subset, so we'll call this 3B, or maybe it's a fourth bullet, is filling your project with good people. If you have people who are the type who really want to take on things and like expectations, like that responsibility, like to check things off as completed, those are the people that are going to be really successful and drive a successful project over the finish line.
So resources, collaboration, and set the right expectations.
That's fair.
So why do you think ERP projects fail? Or how do you avoid failures? 3 things to do to avoid failure.
All right, to avoid failure, 3 things. This is great. So why do projects fail? 1, you picked the wrong methodology. And most often I'm saying you didn't select the resources. You wanted a consultant-driven implementation. You let the consultants just do it for you. A lot of great consultants out there, but I find that it's easier to teach a core team member how to use an ERP system than it is to teach a consultant how a business runs. Those intricacies of a business, I think those are things that those are best kept in the domain of the subject matter expert, and the consultant is best served in that training role versus doing it for them. Again, it's the teach a man to fish parable over again. So that's one. There's pick the right methodology. 2, pick the right system. Epicor is a great system. I love Epicor as well. I don't know the distribution side as well as manufacturing. The manufacturing is my blood. In terms of discrete manufacturing with a branch of configure to order, make to order environments, Epicor is such a sweet spot, right? You need to know, does my business processes fall within the sweet spot of the right ERP system? Right. So if you're a plastics manufacturer, if you're a steel manufacturer, if you're an electrical assembly manufacturer, you need to make sure that you're taking the needs of that industry, mapping them appropriately onto the right system, because the needs from industry to industry, if you're discrete, if you're process, et cetera, can be very different. So picking the right system. Now, avoiding a failure beyond those 2, I think really at that point, this sounds too wishy-washy. I like management commitment. The management has to be committed to getting this project finished, and that sometimes means this product development initiative is going to be shelved. This lean initiative is going to be shelved. One of the challenges with an implementation are competing projects, and as an organization, you can't do it all at once as much as you want to. So you have to kind of figure out priorities is not a matter of saying yes, but it's a matter of saying no. And if ERP is truly the priority, you have to be saying no to some other things.
Say no to other things so that you can focus on the ERP implementation. And
ERP sucks a lot of oxygen out of the room.
Absolutely. Just have a clear focus in terms of what you're doing.
Yes.
And do you have a lot of customers asking you about AI? Does this ERP AI enabled? Do you have customers talking to you about AI, or where do you see that heading?
Yeah, AI is becoming a huge talking point inside of the ERP community. I think AI has connected itself to a lot of existing talking points in terms of automation and integration most often. Because the idea of automation, can AI help take mundane tasks, automate them such that my end user is now focused on more value-added tasks, better customer communication because some of the underlying steps were completed by a bot or what have you. That is something that comes up very frequently. I think the idea of smart integrations are becoming more and more a thing. Integrations are great as long as all the data lines up. But if there's some nuance in there, sometimes the system will work correctly, but the output is not what you expected. Now, where can AI sit amongst there to say, can I evaluate the conversation going back and forth, look at some of those intangibles and apply some intelligence against them such that the output is more often what you're looking for. So those are kind of two key areas where I see right away people are looking for some assistance there.
Talking about integrations, that's what we do. We make systems talk to each other
Right.
for distributors. So Brad, talking about the cloud strategy, this is a question I always had. Let's say I'm doing an implementation, it doesn't have to be ERP, it could be anything, right? So where are you hosting it? There are big clouds in the market. AWS, Azure, Google Cloud. How do you decide, right? Which cloud am I going to host it, or am I going to have my own cloud, or how do you define that? What advice would you give there?
Sure. So I tend to think of it as a conversation about access and control. Assuming that you have a bunch of different options with the cloud deployment, let's assume it's an ERP system. You have some different options to deploy it. Understanding the degree of access and control that you want is really important in terms of making the right decision. So if you are a hands-off customer in terms of ERP administration, you don't need a lot of control over the back end in terms of the data, the application itself. Finding a public cloud option is quite good. And what people find there is what you call SaaS-based licensing, software as a service, where you only consume the application as long as you keep paying for it. So it's more of a monthly recurring strategy. And for customers who don't need that back-end responsibility, perfect. That's often a good solution. Now, if you are looking for a degree of access and control that's different than that, that might be because you have reporting requirements. You really want to get in and access that data from various directions, or you have integration requirements where you need to integrate the software at varying different levels. You might want a model that is more kind of a perpetual license-based approach, which is kind of the traditional approach where you buy that license, you own it forever. And then you can deploy it however you want, whether it's in an on-premise environment, whether it's in a private cloud. From there, you can play with a bunch of different options there. So I think with customers, that's the most direct first option. Now, from there, there are a lot of different capabilities of where you can stick your software. From there, you're talking about things like uptime, egress fees, overall total cost of ownership, ease of maintenance and administration. Those vary pretty significantly if you're looking at Google versus AWS versus Azure versus some of the other, independents out there.
You guys at Estes do both private and public clouds. You manage them both, or?
We provide private cloud access and support and deployment for our customers. That's kind of where our sweet spot is. Our work with public cloud is really all functional, because when you're in a public cloud at this point, all the technical instantiation, the back-end deployment is all managed by the vendor. So you're not worrying about that. Really, at that point, you're just worrying about base functionality. So our support there is all functional in nature.
What do you mean by a private cloud? Does it mean that you're setting up your own data centers, you are hosting everything, you're not going to an Amazon, you're not going to Microsoft? Is that what you mean by a
Good
private
question. So it's kind of a nuanced point. So the idea of a private cloud is a private virtualized server architecture within a firewall protected network space that operates like an on-premise environment, but can be deployed pretty much anywhere. We use US Signal as our data center provider, so we have clouds inside of there so the server instantiation is separated from the physical servers themselves. You can do the same thing in Amazon. You could do the same thing anywhere. The key there is partitioning, that you're creating an air-gapped environment that operates independently of what everyone else is doing. That's really where private cloud has its key, is that there's one firewall, one set of in and outs that governs that environment, that allows for great control, access, and security.
So you guys then don't use Amazon or Google at all. You use US Signal?
We use US Signal, and combination of US Signal and Azure are the places where we play. And you can do basically the same kind of deployment in either of those. And now the decisions of where to go down one direction versus another might have to do with customer requirements, cost, scalability, location, etc.
Switching gears a little bit, what are some leadership principles that have guided you? How are you driven? The theme of this podcast is driven. How do you be driven, and how do you keep yourself driven?
Well, I can give you a couple of principles that I think should drive me. And if they have driven me in the future, that's a little more iffy. But I would say, for one thing, I like frankness. I like the idea of being very clear and honest with people and not talking around subjects. If something's not working, we can all say that it's not working. We don't have to save face and create convoluted, beat around the bush language that obscures that fact. I'm a very frank person, and I appreciate people who are frank to me. I would much rather have someone be frank at the risk of being brusque than to not convey their true message, right? Because when you're not frank, there's a big concern that the message being conveyed gets lost in translation. So that, to me, frankness is really important. Principle of meritocracy, I think, is really important. ultimately everything you do as an individual is based on your own merit. There is a lot that's happening, I find right now, that obscures that basic fact that people need to be good at their jobs. They need to get capable. They need to accept criticism and do more and get better. People who don't understand that basic concept, I need to have certain skills and I need to get better at those skills, are going to struggle. And if you're staffing yourself, if you're working with teams, and if you find yourself making personnel decisions for reasons that are not primarily based on merit, you're going to run into a lot of challenges because people struggle with that. If they feel like they're doing the right job, they're doing the best job, and they're not finding the opportunities available for that for auxiliary reasons, and it could be anything from, simple someone knowing someone, friends of friends, there are all kinds of things that can override basic merit. And so for me, it's always, I'm trying to understand who are the best people for the job. I want to surround myself with the best possible people, because I think when you put people together, that's where you get a lot of success. Now, with that comes one aspect of merit that we don't always consider merit is collaborative capabilities, ability to work with others, and the ability to have a little bit of humility. When you work with a lot of capable people, sometimes egos get high. We got a high ceiling today, which is good. But sometimes egos can really go over top. So you really need to have some humility, understand that there are limitations to what you can do and how you approach. And you try to close those up, but you have to be able to look at yourself, objectively and say, I'm not all I could be. I'm not all I should be. And having that basic capability is so fundamental. When you work with people who can't look at themselves in that manner and be willing to criticize themselves, you're going to struggle as an organization.
And how do you keep yourself motivated? How are you driven?
I would say clear goals and clear things. And what is a goal? It's a thing that I haven't been able to do yet. So having those out there, I think, is really important in terms of, these are the things that I'd like to see happen. These are the places I'd like to go, and keeping those things out in front of you, I think, is really important. I think the very fact that we're getting older, getting old is we don't want to die. We want to live as long as possible. I think that's a general rule. So the goalpost is always moving, right? Because you get a certain level of comfort in your life. Now you have to worry about your health. Now you have to worry about, how do I sustain this? How do I build a future for my family so that I'm setting the stage for them? As those things come, I think complacency is a natural thing to take you over, but complacency only happens in the absence of awareness. So if you're keeping yourself aware of where you truly stand in the world, there's always new goals to be setting.
Don't stay in your comfort zone.
No, not at all.
And can you talk about some mistakes you've done? If there's one thing you would have done differently in your career, is there anything like that?
Sure. I'll give you a short version, a long version. If I would do it again, early in my life and career, I probably would have jumped through more of the hoops in front of me rather than kind of shirk them off. I had a certain iconoclastic tendency that's common to people of lacking maturity and humility, and I thought, I don't need to do that. I'll find my other way. What you learn is those hoops that you could have jumped through are actually tunnels, and those tunnels are shortcuts to get where you want to go. So if you don't want to jump through those hoops, you want to take the long way around, you might find that you've wasted a lot of time. And I think out of some absence of humility, what is iconoclasm? But the combination of ignorance and immaturity. And so I think that was probably for me a tendency that cost me some time and cost me some valuable lessons that I had to learn later than I should have.
Brad, we interview a lot of leaders for this podcast, and one question we like to ask them is, what is the question you would like to ask the next guest we interview? And we recently interviewed Frank Heenan, the global VP of distribution at Epicor, and the question he wanted to ask is, what is the technology disruption you are seeing with respect to distributors?
Biggest technology disruptor that I'm seeing with regard to distributors quite often has to do with when the ERP system hits the shop floor and the distribution floor. That is an area that I think is still, there's a lot of work that can be done to make shop floor activities, distribution warehouse activities more efficient, more effective, more connected. I know that's an area that Epicor is pushing on: better device management, better user interfaces that connect to devices, better ability to take information from the shop floor, whether it's scanning, visual learning. That's obviously another place where AI has a place, in the ability to pick up visual cues in the absence of clear barcode or, 3D barcodes or, any kind of insignia, the ability to scan information intelligently, bring that information into the system. I think both in manufacturing and distribution, those are areas of great future. I don't know if they're disruptive right now, but they're areas that need to be disrupted further.
So connected, make sure everything is connected and connected devices.
Yeah, more efficient, more effective really is the key there.
So what is the question you would like to ask the next guest we interview?
Sure. So I'm a big Star Trek fan, and I was watching the movie Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. I'm an old school Trekker, and there's this great theme that comes out of the movie: the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one. And this theme was brought out great in the movie, where the character Mr. Spock sacrifices himself so that he can save the crew and the Enterprise from certain destruction. Of course, there's got to be certain destruction, otherwise it doesn't matter. But he says that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. So my question to the next person would be, as a manager, how do you balance the needs of your team overall with the needs, the rights, the responsibilities, the dreams, the hopes, and the aspirations of each individual team member? Because they're not uncommon that those things can find themselves in conflict. And Spock's answer was personal sacrifice. But as a manager, of course, we can't always be throwing ourselves into the fire. What does that manager do to try to balance those challenges?
It's a great question, Brad. How do you keep yourself updated? What are you reading right now?
Oh, sure. So for me, the book I'm reading right now is called The Final Countdown by Eric Kimberling. Eric Kimberling's with Third Stage Consulting, his company. They are a software selection company. They help customers figure out ERP systems. And he wrote this book called The Final Countdown. It's about digital transformation. And as we all know, digital transformation is a very overused term. We call it a drinking game term, right? Every time someone says it, you have to take a shot. We'd all be on the floor drunk by now. But I think his book really cuts through a lot of the fluff and gets tangible about how business culture and the needs of the organization and a good future state roadmap really come together. So I've really enjoyed that.
The book I'm reading right now is Multipliers by Liz Wiseman. It's a great book on leadership. How do you be a multiplier, and how do you make your team be multipliers? How do you get more out of your team, and how can you even do more? So that's a book I'm reading right now. So Brad, it's been great having you on Driven by DCKAP podcast. Great to see you in Nashville. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I love this.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Driven podcast. Check out our other episodes for more and subscribe to be the first to access every new episode.